Hey everyone, this is Professor Escobar. I'm recording from my house. I'm really excited to go over this week's lesson for you. I put a lot of love into it, and as I continue to kind of redesign all my online classes to kind of optimize all the possibilities of being online, which is cool. Just keep in mind that I grew up in with dial-up internet, and I still kind of don't have a TikTok, although I feel like I should download one right now. But it's just kind of all kind of new and even as it's familiar to me kind of teaching online. It's something that you students probably have a better sense to do than your professors, to be honest. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the course together. I'm going to share my screen. So last week was kind of like a warm up to the class and like what we'll be doing. This week will just be, let's see. All right. This week will just be us kind of really getting into what is poetry, how to write poetry. So as we continue on to our class, we're now in week two. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up really quickly is that you all are automatically subscribed to buy two online copies of two books for this course, Don't Let Me Be Lonely and Summer Snow, but you can opt out of it. This is something I'm trying out this semester at the request of the bookstore. Um, for students to automatically buy digital copies. They said it helps students. We'll see if it actually does. So you can let me know if it's like annoying or if it's actually helpful or if it's cool or it's useful. But you could, if you want to just keep the books, you don't have to do anything, but you can opt out of it and you won't be charged by just clicking through that link on the week two module. And please do that by Saturday. All right, so first let's go through all the assignments. So I want you to post something poetic. This is in this class, I um, the most important thing is for you to kind of figure out how to be an artist if you haven't figured that out already. I feel like I'm still figuring that out, and I get, excited when people recognize me as an artist, of all things. Um, so this is here I'm wanting you to kind of post a picture and then explain what is poetic about it. And I want you to kind of develop your own sense and tap into your own sense of what is poetry and what is poetic. And I want to take us away from the page because sometimes, we get high school classes and English classes even can be overbearing on what is poetry, what is art, what is literature. And I want you to come at this question from like an artistic sense and not just any artistic sense, your artistic sense. So it's just a little warm-up exercise. And this is a question that we'll be exploring over the course of the semester. What is poetic? This exercise is I hope you find it fun. You just have to write three lines of poetry. But I want you to go through your phone or go through your social media feed or even go online, doesn't matter where, and find three photos that are not related to one another, that are different from one another. And then I want you to write a line of poetry for each photo. So one of the reasons why we're doing this assignment is because I want you to understand that poetry and poems are made up of images. They're made up of things that the poetry is asking us to imagine. It asks us to imagine certain things, certain sensations, certain ideas, certain feelings often by mixing the senses. And so we'll explore what all that means, but right now I kind of want you to kind of get a sense of like, hey, poetry is more than words. In fact, one poet says you don't even need words to write a real poem, which is, poetic, of course, and a little um, artful. Um, but I want you to kind of get a sense of like, hey, poetry is more than words. Poetry is more than words. Because I think if you could kind of understand that, it becomes easier to write poems. If writing poems can ever be easy. So this week we have our first set of readings. And I want to kind of give you a range of different poets that range from being very um, direct and formal and lyrical to being very abstract and experimental. And we even have like an ancient poet in there, Rumi. And we'll circle back to these poets in our lesson. We'll have our lesson first, and then we'll read through some of the poems together. So let's go ahead and open up another window. But yeah, let me know if there's any questions so far. Um, just a reminder, so this semester, the way that I'm designing the course is I want you to kind of choose your own adventure. So I will drop at least 15 assignments from your final grade. So what's that mean? It means that every week you could choose to do like not do anywhere from like 1 to 3 assignments and you'll be fine. If you do 3 assignments every week, it's probably going to be less fine. But I don't have a problem. We can look at that question together as the semester unfolds. But I want you to be able to pick and choose what assignments you want to do. And so if one is like really stressing you out, you don't have to do it, or you don't have time for 1 or 2 assignments a week, that's totally understandable. But the reason I really want to give you a lot of assignments is because I want you to have a lot of different ways in which you can um, create the classroom, this virtual classroom wherever you are. So some of the assignments are going to be short and sweet, and you may be able to complete it as you listen to your favorite podcast or on your commute. Other assignments are like mini projects, right? I want you to break out your watercolors for an afternoon and kind of just like, metaphorically paint a poem and get lost in the artistry of it, and then like take a little, photo of it and share it. And that's actually the assignment is so I want to give you a lot of different ways. And then another reason I'm doing this is also personal. Like it's, I worked really hard to, I have for it to teach poetry, and I don't always have the opportunity to. So I kind of want to take this, if I don't get the opportunity again, because for whatever reason, for a while, I want to be able to kind of create like a textbook. And I also want to share these assignments on social media because I don't want to limit my teaching and my art to like the classroom. And I'm like, hey, what actually is really cool? Like, what actually works? And so I'm trying to make this class seem like less like school as possible and more like an artist studio. So that's why we have a lot of different assignments. Um, anyways, so reading poetry is really important. Reading poetry aloud is really important. I used to hate it. I used to like cry, basically almost cry on stage when I asked to read poems. I was that bad. Or throw like a tantrum and a fit and get really upset. That I also did that too, which is not becoming of a young poet, I will say. But I don't want you to have that experience. And I don't want you to have that relationship to reading your work out loud. Now I'm on the other end of the spectrum where I can't stop talking, and I'm an like I guess you can say I'm an inspiring influencer, how broke influencer who is probably trying to build out his platform a little too late. But anyways, I'm excited. I'm excited that you all have some familiarity with being online and presenting yourself and reading your work, even possibly. Um, Reading a poem is can be an art as much as writing a poem. And there's some poets who are like really good at that, and some poets like me who are like, I'm okay. It's kind of hit and miss, with a reading. Like sometimes I read and it goes over really well and I wow the room, which is exciting. And sometimes I read and people are like, okay, that was interesting. But I want you to practice that. I want you to practice. And we'll have like classes and lessons on like how to read online and stuff. So, like last week, I want you to break out your notebook and I want you to make observations as you're reading the poem. I thank you everyone. I didn't really see this. I think I saw this like once or twice, but this is not really a space where you're like, I like this, I hate this poem, or like I don't get it. You know, like those are not helpful observations. Your observations are really like about how the poem is working. And a lot of almost everyone did that. It's like, how is this poem working? What is interesting? What is beautiful? How are these words coming together? That's what these observations are about. Or you could be like, hey, this is a really interesting line. It made me think of X, Y, and Z. However you want to immerse yourself in these poems by writing and taking notes, I want to see those notes. And but whether you like a poem is kind of irrelevant. You know that you have a lot of selection. And also, like, not to brag, but these are really cool poems that I kind of cherry picked for you guys from what I was able to find online. And they're very educational. So I know you all love them, and you all have been loving them. I go on tangents. All right. So then I want you to share one or two observations from this week as a way of kind of conducting a conversation as a class. This way you can see how others are thinking and writing about poetry. We have this week's lesson, which I'll start momentarily. I'm excited to go over some basic fundamentals. We have this week's Zoom class. And then this week ends, I'm pretty sure, if we look at it, with asking you to write two poems. And this second, so the first one is like a sonnet. I want you to basically write a sonnet with an emphasis on a volta. So a sonnet presents like an argument over 14 or 16 lines, and it offers a chain. It first presents an argument, and then it presents a change in perspective. And that change in perspective is called a volta, which we'll learn about today. And then I want you to write another poem, but this one could be shorter. It could be like a verse, it could be a stanza. It doesn't have to be a full poem, like, like a full like 20 line poem. That's good. That would be hard to do to write two poems in a week. Um, But what I want you to focus on in this exercise is something called leaps. And I give you an example of that, and I'll go over what that is in today's lesson. All right, let's continue. So let's go ahead and dive into today's lesson. Poetry fundamentals, observation, musicality, volta, and leaps. So when it comes to like how to write a poem, like there is no one right answer. And what's really cool is that different generations of poets come up with different responses to this question. So if you ask like poets in the medieval ages, they're going to have, of course, a different response than biblical poets or ancient, you know, su subcontinent poets from India. They're going to have a different response than ancient Japanese or early modern Japanese poets, let's say, that were writing in the 1600s, or they'll have a different response than the Victorians and the Romantics. They'll have a different response than like Tupac and Chappell Roan, both of whom we'll talk about today. Um, but this is, after all, a poetry class, like, professor, you might be like, I don't find that response helpful, that everyone has a different answer. Well, it's all good. You're in the right place because we're going to start going over some of the answers that different poets have given over the ages. I'm really excited to share this because I'm kind of sharing like my cheat sheet with you all of like, hey, this is what it means to write a poem. Here's some of the strategies, here's some of the exercises, here's some of the things that poets have said about how you start writing poetry. First, the first kind of way of how to write poetry is by making observations about the world. You'll hear this from a number of writers today is like they're sitting in front of their computer, they're sitting at their desk, they're trying to make it as a writer. They're in their 20s, they're in their 30s, they're in their 40s, whatever. And they want to start publishing. They want to start writing a book. They want their work to get out there. And often where they first start is writing about their immediate settings. Like they write about the room that they're in. They write about the sounds they're hearing. They write about what's lying on their desk, what's lying in their windowsill, what's um what's kind of lingering in the atmosphere. And as we kind of start to make these observations, or as or we immerse ourselves in the world immediately around us, we notice that the world that we live in is a lot more strange than we can possibly know. In fact, the novelist Albert Camus says you can write a novel about one person's day on this earth, an entire novel just about one day. So, as poets, we know that we don't even know everything there is about the world, of course. But there is so much out there. There is so much to understand that, you know, it moves our pens, it moves our hands, it excites our minds. We are excited to start that we can possibly figure out the mysteries of the universe, or we glimmer some truth about love, or we stumble upon some profound realization about what it means to lie, what it means to live. And as poets, we kind of have these feelings and sensations, and they start stemming from observations that we make about the world. It could be as simple as the way you prepare your morning coffee. There are plenty of poems, like from Eileen Miles, about the way that your coffee maker, just observing your coffee maker in the morning, it could teach you, or it could share something profound about life. And so observation is kind of like the fuel for some of the more poetic epiphanies that we have later in our poems. So it's a starting place that leads us to, yeah, observations are a starting place in poems. As you can imagine, there are lots of essays, there are lots of treatises about observation and what it means to look. And I hope to dig up some essays and articles about observation. There's lots of really interesting stuff written about what it means to observe, what it means to look, what it means to see. But as artists, as we all are in this class, we have some sense of what it means to see, what how we look, and often our upbringing, our childhood, our teenagers have kind of taught us how to look at the world and how to appreciate things. But when it comes to writing poems specifically, I find that a lot of poets need like a certain level of quietude in their soul, in their life, and then just space to kind of observe what they're thinking and what they're feeling and their surroundings in order to kind of understand the world and really understand and start writing those their poems. So what does it mean? Like, how does this look like in a poem? Like, Professor Escobar, what are you saying? What are you talking about? Let's go ahead and look at an example. And this one is from this week's reading, of course. It's from Monica Dalla Torre's How to Look at Mexican Highways. So one of the exciting things about poetry is like once you start observing stuff, you start when you assembled enough observations, patterns form. and meaning forms, and that meaning is like um inductive rather than deductive. So that meaning is coming out of the observations. You're forming a pattern, which is kind of what we want to do in poems. Anyways, I'll talk about that a little bit later. All right. So let me go ahead and read Monica de la Torre's How to Look at Mexican Highways. You are not going anywhere. 1.1. No one is waiting for you. 1.2. In case someone is waiting for you, you can always explain the delay later. 1.3. Blame it on traffic. No one else knows that you chose to walk. 2. Don't look at the pavement. Look at the things you don't see when you're indoors. Water towers, cables. 2.21. Cables bringing other people's voices and faces onto TV monitors. 222. Cables bringing electricity to light bulbs and refrigerators. 2.3. Laundry on clotheslines. 2.4. Empty cans of food. 2.41. With flowers growing out of them. 2.42. With cactuses growing out of them. 3. Feel the waves surround you. Waves bringing other people's voices to the speakers of your sound system. Waves of street sounds. 4. Measure how fast you can run up and down staircases. Compare that to the speed of the cars driving by. 5. When you tire, stand in the middle of the overpass. 5.1. Look down. 5.2. Try to look ahead. Attempt to delineate the city's skyline. 5.21. If there's too much pollution, look down again. 5.22. Hold on tighter to the rail. 5.23. Stay there a little bit longer. Remember, no one is waiting for you. 2.24. You're not going anywhere. Through the rails, you will see stories unfolding on the street. 6.1. Pay attention. 6.2. You are not they. 6.3. They are not they. 6.31. They are 1 plus 1 plus 1 indefinitely. 7. You're surrounded by monads going somewhere. 8. There is a purpose to their movement. 9. Desire is a federacy. All right. I hope you thought that was as dope as I did. But some of the things that I really love about this poem is one, this is a poem about just observations. And what's really cool about poems like this, with that have like a repeated structure, is like we can kind of jump to our feet and say, hey, I could write a poem like this, you know? I could write a poem that this has such a cool structure that I could write a poem about how to look at American streets, for example, or American subways, or how to look at the Los Angeles freeways, for example. Um, because it's so structured and that structure is repeated and it's so clear. It's in this like dictionary like numerical categorization schema of like where you have the first entry and then you have the secondary entries and then the ones that branch off of that if it's super technical. It's just a very interesting poem about different observations that she's making about the highway and then kind of instructions about how you can make those observations yourself. So it's both giving you kind of tangible stuff that she's observed, and then it's asking you, it's implying, um, it's evoking more of the landscape. So that's a kind of other cool technique that she's doing is not she's not just like painting a picture for you, she's giving you instructions to kind of help you paint a picture for yourself. So there's a mix of the two, which is kind of really cool. Um, she's she's also when she makes her observations, being very specific, right? Cables, water towers, um, um, cables bringing electricity to light bulbs and refrigerators. You know, and when you're making your observations, it's important to get those nouns and pronouns in there. You know, laundry on clotheslines. That specificity is what gives language its power. You know, um, so those are other tips when you're making your observations. Cool. And then, what's cool about observations is that it's always in a poem, they're always going to lend themselves to some sort of realization or profound truth or, beautiful understanding. And we get that kind of epiphany at the end. Desire is effederacy, and we know we've all written poems where it starts with this, right? With these kinds of like abstract, kind of mushy feelings and statements that are just like overarching, right? That's the opposite of what an observation is. This is like an equation. It's like desire equals this. And, it's the opposite of saying like stuff like, empty cans of food with flowers growing on the out of them. And so she kind of builds up to this kind of truth, this beautiful realization, whatever we want to call it, through this series of observations. Um, so we can see really how observations kind of fuel like the beautiful, kind of more profound moments of a poem. Any questions so far? Okay. So I think so one of the exercises for this week will be to write an observation of your street or of a freeway system or of some sort of public space, and I'll carve out those instructions later in today's lesson. All right, so let's go on to the next poetic principle, which is musicality. Oh, actually, there's like a cool thing I wanted to kind of show you guys. All right, if you could let me see if this works. All right. Um, right, the screen. 1 second. Okay, I can actually like put my face on the screen at the same time as we look at these poems together. All right. Oh, so I don't know how helpful that is, but sometimes people like to see the a face. It's not just speaking into the void. All right. So another fundamental principle of poetry is musicality. So this is really interesting because this will help us kind of distinguish what makes modern poetry different from like verse or Shakespearean poetry, which is probably what some of us are most familiar with. Lyrical poetry, as it's also often called, or where it's written in where there's meters and rhyme and slant rhyme. Musicality is a different concept from all that and kind of what establishes modern poetry as modern. All right. So we start with a beautiful little print by Jose Guadalupe Posada, a calavera playing a guitar, and it's a musicality. Musicality is defined when a word or a phrase carries emotional meaning. We strive to have a few moments of musicality in our poems. Of course, an entire poem can't be musical, Otherwise, it will be ungrounded and hard to relate to. We are all familiar with a classic example of musicality. And we some of us know it by heart. It comes from Part of Your World by The Little Mermaid, in from Disney's The Little Mermaid. I would play the song, but because of copyright issues, it'll flag this on YouTube, so I won't do that. Um, but you all know this verse, right? And so I'll go ahead and read it. So what is musicality, Professor Escobar? What are you saying? Like, what is like what emotional meaning? What? Okay, here's an example. Look at us. Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection's complete? Wouldn't you think I'm the girl who has everything? Look at this trove, treasures untold. How many wonders can one cavern hold? Look around, here you think, sure, she's got everything. I've got gadgets and gizmos aplenty. I've got who's its and what's its galore. You want a thingamabob? I've got 20. But who cares? No big deal. I want more. All right, I totally didn't do the new who sings the new version justice. I didn't do the new Little Mermaid justice in that reading. But you get the point, right? If you look at that highlighted area, gadgets and gizmos aplenty, um, you'll see that what is she talking about? What is a gadget and a gizmo aplenty? Like, what is she saying? It's like, girl, what's a who's it? What's it galore? What's a thingamabob? So when we put like a little kind of focus on those words, we realize that they're nonsensical. And nonsense does not mean that it doesn't have sense. It just means that it's not literal. So it's a non-literal, non um not it's a non-literal meaning of the word. Instead, it carries emotional meaning, and that emotional meaning overrides the fact that it's nonsensical, that it doesn't make sense, that it's not literal, that it's um so yeah. But that this is one of the things that makes poetry musical. This is where the lyricism comes from. It doesn't come from just stressed, unstressed syllables. Most poets don't even write that way anymore and haven't for hundreds of years. But instead, they create musicality by throwing in words and phrases that their emotional meaning overrides they throw in and phrases that have emotional meaning more than anything, and it's spectacular, right? It's super deeply relatable, it's deeply felt, so you can see that that effect is really cool. So when it comes, it's like, hey, professor, how do I write a poem? I'm like, well, have some musical words and phrases in that poem, where you kind of just feel it as a poet, and the poem elevates to this other place. And that's kind of what we live for in as poets, is these kind of moments of fireworks going off. And we kind of have to build up to those in our poetry. We can't just have like a whole poem about gadgets and gizmos of plenty. No one will know what we're talking about. So and what's kind of interesting is that she focuses on um her gadgets and gizmos aplenty, and she gives you a whole sense of it, even though she's just kind of using nonsensical language to kind of give you how much it's worth. Because in those moments, I guess you can think of as musicalities, you're really speaking from the heart, and often that takes the form of slang on the internet. Um, and we see that a lot in memes, and but in poems, this is kind of what happens is this there's these musical moments. All right. Any questions about that? So we've covered two concepts. We've covered observations in poems. We want to make observations about the world, and then we can build up to like realizations. Um, and that are deeply felt, and like that's what we're building up to. When we look at the math of the poetry line by line, it's adding up to or it's subtracting to this conclusion. Um, then we just looked at musicality. It's cool to have certain words and phrases that are really pop and really, you know, are fun, and we don't know why they're in there. We don't know what makes them fun. We don't know what makes them cool. But in the space of the poem, it just makes sense, even if the words and the phrases themselves don't make sense. Instead, we have a different way of making sense in poems. And that's what's so explosive about musicality. And so, another way of writing a poem is to have what's called a volta. And some of you might be familiar with this from like your AP classes. Okay. But basically, volta is the part of a sonnet where you present a change in your argument, a change in perspective. And how you form that change, how you form that change in perspective is really the art of poetry, of a sonnet, is in life, we have our parents to kind of teach us right and wrong. We go out into the world and we come across all these decisions. We have to form these perspectives as part of our survival and perseverance and thrival, or part of our pleasure and joy and love and prosperity. we're you know Poems can be a way to kind of engage the heart and mind, that is battered by logic and battered by morality and battered by relationships and battered by society. Is that, like songs where, pop songs where we own certain emotions, we own how we feel, we own the breakup, we own our success, we own, you know, making decision our lifestyle. In Voltas and sonnets have done that for centuries. They present arguments about what it means to be beautiful or whatever about society and whatnot, and then they offer a change in perspective. And how they change perspective is not through hard logic, it's not through parenting, it's not through older sibling, logic, it's not through manipulation or was it gaslighting? It's not through, seniority or entitlement. In the space of a poem, we're using emotions to change people's perspectives, or to show how our perspective has changed, and own it. Um, all right. So sonnets as a poem, as a poetic form, you probably know they're 14 to 16 lines. The first 8 lines are where you present the poet. So present your perspective, the argument. This is the state of the world. And then the last 6 lines, the shorter half, is where you're like, and this is what I think, and this is what's cool, and this is what's actually right. This is what blah blah blah. And that change in perspective is called a volta. And so when it comes to writing poems and you're like, hey, how do I finish this poem? How do I know it's a full poem? I'm like, well, are you trying to say something about love? Are you trying to say something about, a breakup? Are you trying to say something about the place you're from, or a vacation you took through these canyons? Well, do you have a change in perspective? What how did this experience change your perspective on love, or change your perspective on what it means to be um, a human, or change your perspective on um, how we on what it means to be alive and all that. So a way we can do that is through, and poets do that is through voltas, is these changes in perspective. And so this part of what makes a poem a poem. Not all poems are sonnets, and not most poems are not don't have voltas, but it's really helpful to think about when it comes to kind of giving like a full emotional experience in that of a poem if something's missing. And it's also kind of good to work through. Like I want to write a number of sonnets of like what it means to be like a queer professional in my 30s. And maybe I don't feel like I have a lot of people in my corner. It's like, hey, what's some voltas about that? What's some voltas about um, what it means to make art and the purpose of life and the value of education and all that, and what it means to love oneself and all that. So, voltas are really cool because they really can be like, hey, this is what I really think. This is where I draw my line in the sand. And that's why we kind of say poems can ground us because they offer these lucid um, perspectives on the world and what we think. So let's look at a classic volta together. One that we all probably know by heart, and if you pass like certain gay bars when this song is playing, people will be singing along. All right, it's "Good Luck Babe" by Chapel Roan. Um, it's fine, it's cool. I probably don't even need to read it, right? You know what it's all about. But let's go through it together. It's fine, it's cool. You can say we are nothing, but you know the truth. And guess I'm the fool with her arms outstretched like an angel through the car sunroof. I don't want to call it off, but you don't want to call it love. You only want to you only want to be the one that I call baby. And so here we get the change in perspective, and I've kind of drawn the volta like here. I guess you can draw it in the line before, but what's we have a change in perspective, right? She starts off by saying it's fine, it's cool, right? And then she's like, actually, it's not fine, it's not cool. Like, girl, I'm moving on, like I gotta move on. Like I love I own it. I love this. Like I love spending time with you. That's what she's saying in the first part, you presenting your argument. I love spending time with you. You make me feel amazing. Like our love is really something. It's real. It like I could feel it. But at the end of the day, you're being fake about it. You are denying yourself that it is real, like it is real, it is something. You're wanting to put it into this box, you're wanting to put it into this corner. You want to kind of keep up appearances and lead a fake life. I'm not here for that, you know? But just keep in mind how powerful this Volta is because she presents the argument, she presents the perspective, the reality. Another way you can think about this is she presents like the exterior panorama of like the world and society and the situation. And then the Volta is her interior panorama of like how she's feeling, like her emotional life and um, her inner life and her feelings and emotions. So the presentation, the first part of the sonnet is the outer panorama, and then the Volta is the inner panorama. I hope that makes sense. Um, but she's presenting an argument, right? She's not just being like, you're fake bi. She's making an observation. She says, you can kiss 100 boys in bars. You can do that. You can do this and you will still be unhappy. You can, and then she gives us kind of like these like cliches about love. You can shoot your shot, go shoot your shot. You could try to stop the feeling. You could, and then that she gives us that cliche, and she gives us another cliche. You can make another, or you can say it's just the way you are. So she's making an argument. She's presenting us with cliches. She's presenting us with how good it actually it is. she's presenting us with like the need to be wanted to be called baby and have something kind of articulated and real and shareable. And then, the voltage changes, like but I actually don't want this because I want something real. Um, so that's one way to think about voltas is like you are presenting a perspective, you kind of paint a panorama for someone, and then you kind of paint, and in the second half of the poem, where the speed really picks up and it gets really emotional, you paint another contrasting panorama, and to contrast the perspective you presented in the first half. But with the Volta, um, one, we should have some sense of it being faster or acceleration, right? We want we want to do more with our change of perspective with less, basically. That's kind of like the math in the Volta. Paint a perspective, like really do diligence, you know, you do better, when it comes to presenting the argument, and you're real. You're real when you're presenting the argument. And then for the Volta, you do more with less, and that's what makes it glittering and shining and beautiful, is that in fewer lines, you do less. And we do actually get fewer lines because because it's repeated, we get that repetition and those wonderful repetitions in this pop song, this iconic pop song. All right. Does that make sense? Any questions about voltas? All right. So we go to our last fundamental concept of the week, leaps. So next week we'll have kind of more advanced concepts. These concepts are like kind of tangible, where you can like point to like lines or phrases or words in a poem, or stanzas, and be like, hey, that's a volta, or hey, that's a musical phrase. That's a moment of musicality. Hey, that's an observation. Um, so yeah. And just again, like this is like the observation of the year. You can kiss 100 boys on bars and you would have to stop the world to stop the feeling. Oh my God, like that is such an amazing observation. All right. But it's that the power, then that's the power of observations, is that they kind of fuel the beauty of your poem and like the excitement of your poem. Is like, hey, you really are using words to kind of carve out something, an idea that we can share, and that leads to everyone like understanding the world differently. All right, enough about that. Leaps. All right, so for the last few minutes, this one is a kind of easy concept to kind of sink our teeth into. Maybe the easiest concept of all the concepts that we've covered today is a leaps, because we see these all the time in rap and hip hop. We see them all the time. That's what makes rap and hip hop so cool, is that you're jumping from line to line, from maybe you're jumping subjects, you're changing subjects, but the emotion is just like building up, building up, building up, building up. All right. So leaps, to move quickly from one place to another, to clear a distance, to act or change conditions quickly. That's what a leap is, from the dictionary. Um, what makes a poem, as we see in ancient poetry, but we see in, pop music today, is that you are changing the subject and you're making connections quickly from one lyric to the next, from one lyric to the next. You're rhyming things in new ways, you're making these connections, you are keeping in rhythm, and it's all flowing. It's all flowing. And so that this concept is called leaps. So the idea that line by line you are changing the subject of what you're talking about, or you're changing the subject of what you're talking about, but there's a through line, there's something that's flowing, there's emotions that are continuing, or they are able to continue because you make those leaps. And that's one of the reasons why we have line breaks is like we just cut out what we need, and then we leap to the next thing. And it's kind of like this beautiful buffet, this beautiful waterfall of emotions. So that idea, that the way my definition might be a little fuzzy, but we see this immediately right off the bat as soon as we look at an example. So this is Tupac and Dr. Dre. So he does have kind of like a messed up word how he refers to women. So I'm sorry about that. It's he the Tupac and a number of rap artists were notoriously misogynistic, and Maya Angelou had to pull him aside at one point. It was like, you don't talk to women like that. And they were also, notoriously suicidal and notoriously violent towards one another. Um, and but yeah, so I just wanted to give you that advisory as we get into the poem. So out on bail, fresh out of jail, California dreaming. But like one of the reasons I want to share this is like this is the music that everyone was listening to when I was in high school. Like I was immersed by this music. So like it's not like this is really from my world, and from our world. Out on bail, fresh out of jail, California dreaming. Soon as I step out of scene, I hear hoochie screaming, for money and alcohol, the life of a West Side player, where cowards die and the strong ball. Only in Cali, where we riot, not rally, to live and die. Living in LA, we wearing chucks, not dollies. Yeah, that's right. Dressed in locks and khaki suits, and ride is what we do. Flossing, but have caution, we collide with other crews, famous because we throw grams. Worldwide, let them recognize from Long Beach to Rosencrantz, bumping and grinding like a slow jam in its west side. So you know the row won't down to no man. Say what you say, give me that bomb beat from Dre. Let me serenade the streets of LA. From Oakland to Sacktown, the Bay Area, and back down. Cali is where they put their Mac down. Give me love. So this is really cool. We see this all the time, these leaps in rap and hip hop. Even if you just index the last word of the line, you can see that the subject of the line is changing with every line. So, uh, um, so leaps. So here he's talking about get freedom and dreaming. And the next, he's talking about being on the street, and he's talking about um, attracting, people that he finds attractive. Then we move on to the struggle, fiending for money and alcohol, the life of a West Side player, the struggle, reputation. So his subjects are changing sentence to sentence, but like he's rhyming, but so you get those emotional leaps and those emotional connections. So like beauty in a poem is like how far are you able to, or how much can you leap? How quickly can you leap from one line to the next? So I want you to practice this week. I hope that makes sense. You're changing the subject sentence by sentence. You can even tell how the subject changes if you just look at the last word of each line. um, but yes, the energy flows, and in fact, it builds up even as you're cutting yourself off or you're pausing. You're just giving us exactly what we need in that line, and it's so much of what we want that it carries us to the next line. So we'll have our own exercises on like hip hop and rap and leaps more in the semester. But for the exercise for this week, so if you attended, you don't have to do it. But for everyone that's watching the video, what I would like you to do is to write one stanza, we'll say 100 words, one or two stanzas in the style of how to look at Mexican highways, but you can use any place instead. You can write how to look at the freeway or how to look out the window at Alvera Street, but it has to have some pronoun in it. So Mexican is a pronoun. So a pronoun is like, um, of course, it's like he, she, they, them. It's also the name, the names, the right name for what you're trying to say. It's not like I want food. It's like, no, I want I want honeycomb apple. I want a Fuji apple. You know, Fuji is a pronoun. So the more you know. So just it's a name for a fancy name for something, the actual title. So how to look at Los Angeles freeways, how to look at San Gabriel valleys, the valleys in San Gabriel Valley, how to look at the beach in Santa Monica, how to look at the bike trail in Goleta, how to look at the cafe in off of State Street, how to look at, so you get the picture. And then I want you to follow the same dictionary style setup for making observations. And here's a few tips. So one, the entry can be as long as you want, but notice how she groups it. And this is a good lesson in like how to form a stanza, which is like a room, fancy word for room, right? How to form a room, how to have a box, to put words in for your poem. That's a building block for your poem. Um, so she starts with one, you're not going anywhere, and then she kind of builds off of that. Um, and here she's kind of giving an instructions. So you are not going anywhere. So you can give an instructions like order at the cafe or sit down with your coffee, or, pull off to the side when traffic lets up, if you're on like a bike trail or like um, it's best to take a video with your phone as you're going down the off ramp, which I did once, which you should never do. Luckily, it didn't end. It ended well for me. It didn't end with tragedy. But be safe. But she begins first with the instruction, and then she makes her observations from there. Um, and some of the observations are also instructions, like blame it on the traffic. No one else knows that you chose to walk. So yeah. So I want you to write two stanzas in the style of how to look at Mexican highways, and that's going to be your work for this week. Um, I guess really quickly, what I understand if you have to go, so feel free to log off. But for everyone watching the recording. And let me just get everyone's names really quick. I'm gonna pause the recording. All right, so we have write your names really quick. Um, Let me get a pen. That's easy. All right, so today we have Catherine, Lynn, Hudson, Sophia. All right, all right, all right. So let's continue. Um, Let's go ahead and look. So I talked about the concepts for today. What I want to just touch on is just I briefly want to go into the reading and just point out, hey, I chose this poem for this reason. So The Kingfishers is a classic poem. This is where we get a lot of I chose this poem because of the musicality. Charles Olson will go over more of um his ideas next week. He's actually supplied many of the fundamental ideas for modern poetry. He's one of the most important poets of the post-war period. so in the decade after World War II. Um, so the Kingfishers, it has a lot of musical moments in it. Um, and it also, next week we'll talk about it more, but it's kind of a heavier poem that deserves like rereading and stuff. Um, all right. And thanks, Kate. I got you. Um, so it deserves, so this poem has a lot of musical moments. I mean, just scrolling through it, you can see on these rejectamenta. I don't know if rejectamenta is a real word, but it carries that emotional meaning, and it's going to carry even more as we read the poem. But this is like a really foundational poem for this class, actually. It's influential to all the poets that we're reading. Bernadette Mayer is really cool when it comes to sonnets in the modern day sonnets. When people asked her, "Hey, Bernadette, you say you write sonnets, but they're so different from Shakespeare's sonnets." She's like, "How would you explain that? Like your sonnets don't look anything like what Shakespeare called a sonnet." And what she said famously. If I had to explain it to Shakespeare, I would invite him over for dinner and cook him a rabbit, you know, as a way of saying, hey, I don't have to follow Shakespeare's way. Me and Shakespeare can have a conversation over what it means to have a sonnet, And so really she helps free the Volta from like this 14th, 15th, 16th century form into something more contemporary. So contemporary that Bjork titled one of her albums after it. So she gets like she presents an argument and then she gives us that Volta, that change in perspective. And how you change someone's perspective is a total art. Are you going to use like hard facts, emotions, feelings, observations, musical phrases? Like, there's all sorts of ways to change. There's 1,001 ways to change someone's mind. And so you get to explore that for yourself in a Volta. So there's two sonnets by her. Um, Rosa Alcala, she's also someone she actually is the one that taught me about voltas and where this lesson in part comes from. So she's a good kind of poet for kind of looking at these things. So I wanted to include some songs, some poems by her. Monica Talatore, we talked about her already. So Rumi is really amazing when it comes to leaps and understanding leaps and how lions leap. So he's our ancient poet of the week. And just in one of his poems, you can see like how the leaps operate. Like love is reckless, not reason. Reason seeks a profit. Love comes on strong. So you can see how like the ideas and emotions leap from line to line. We're not following like an essay form. We're not following like a paragraph form. We are these lines leap. They're disconnected, but forming the connection by reading them together is what makes it poetry. All right. And let me know if you have any questions about that. Um, and then, so we have Rumi, and I ask you to read three poems, that one right after the other. So once you click it, you can kind of just access it. I found that I have to like scroll up. I might have to like scroll up a little bit just because like this little ribbon at the top of the page cuts it off. So it's just a free, cool resource, but a little dated. Um, So, when it comes to leaps in modern and contemporary poetry that's written in our lifetimes, I think a good teacher for that, and the one who actually taught me about leaps is C.S. Giscombe, who's a long distance cyclist and a professor at UC Berkeley. Um, he's the one that taught me about leaps. So even if you don't have like these like intense or clearly delineated leaps, you can have like subtle leaps, you can have intuitive leaps, you can have soft leaps, and those are still a kind of beauty. And so I wanted you to read a couple poems by him so you can get a sense of like how leaps operate in like more contemporary poetry. So that's that's the lesson for this week. Are there any questions before we log off? And I'm still working on my lighting game, so I'm sure I'll get that down one of these weeks. But I'm really excited just to teach this course and to I hope you get a lot out of it. And again, like I will drop, at least 15 assignments, maybe as much as 20. So I want you to feel like you can really pick and choose which ones you want to do every week, to an extent. But at the same time, the number of assignments is meant to help you really give you a classroom and by structuring an artistic space where you are where with short assignments, more longer assignments that are more kind of thought experiments, and then like some assignments that are like, hey, here's a poem, set out a couple hours so that you can carve it, something that you like and want to share. All right. Well, have a good week, everyone. Stay hydrated. Don't get sick like me. I have the flu right now and I'm almost out of it. But I appreciate you all for tuning in, and I'm excited to see what works and how I can be helpful. All right. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye.